Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 126. I'm actually super excited. I always say that, but I really am. This is brand new. This area of research that we're about to talk about is something we haven't talked about yet, and it blends in a whole mess of areas that we talk about all the time. So our guest is Nick Balboa, and he works for a company called Creating We, but his area of research was into conversational intelligence and how neuroscience and our physiology and psychology all plays into creating three different levels of conversation. And our conversation with him is going to be about how we can understand that, how oxytocin plays a part in it, how the amygdala plays a part in it. I can't wait to get him on the show and to start this conversation. So let me stop yapping. Let's get him on the show now. We are back on the show with our guest, Nick Balboa. Nick, really great to have you here today. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
So, of course, talking a little bit about your area of research, but I think everyone has a first question on their mind is, who are you and how did you get into this area of research?
Of course. So I am originally from San Francisco, California. I grew up playing hockey there, growing plants. I love to garden. As I grew up, I moved to the East Coast to play hockey, and I ended up getting into Tufts University. And there I studied cognitive and brain sciences, which is a interdisciplinary field that covers how we acquire, process, store, and recall information, and how behavioral and psychological functions like the mind arise from the brain and its internal activities, which are bioelectrical and neurochemical in nature.
How did that become your area? Like when you went to college, were you like, I'm looking for a major. Let me just choose this one.
It was sort of like that. I was initially not in a major my first semester, and I called my mother and I asked her for an opinion on a class to take, and she told me to take a psychology class. And from there, I really got interested in physiology. So I met with my teacher, who was ironically the person running the CBS department there, and she thought that I would be a really good fit for it. So I tried it out, and I ended up really liking it.
That's awesome. Okay, so you kind of fell into something by chance that ended up becoming your career of choice, an area of research that is kind of blending a whole bunch of really great research from other people into understanding a little more about how we have conversations.
I'm very lucky that I've been able to align these things the way they are. It's definitely not intentional that this stuff happens, but I would consider it a blessing. As far as I met Judith and Richard Glazer and the entire Creating We staff, that again, I can thank my mom. Yeah, my mom is awesome.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, I was finishing my freshman year, and I had just done an internship in advertising, and I really didn't think that that was going to be something I wanted to do again. So I asked my mom if she knew anyone that could point me in the right direction as far as getting a job within my field that had some creative aspects to it. I didn't want to just go and join a lab. So my mom ended up talking to one of her friends who knew Judith because she took her course and was certified in conversational intelligence as a corporate coach. So I end up getting on the phone with her, and we have a conversation, and we start talking about these hormones like oxytocin and cortisol and how they relate to behaviors, conversations, and just day-to-day life. And we made a connection. And from that moment on, I started working for her. And that's kind of how I got into the Creating We Institute and to my position today.
Your mom may be the most connected mom in the world.
Well, she is an advertiser herself, so
this
is
makes
one of her
sense.
strong points.
That's a really cool story on how you got to where you are today. So let's go there. So now you're researching in college. You exit. You have this wonderful job where you're getting to apply some of this. What is it that you found? What are some of the things that you discovered in your research that helped you understand our aspects of how we have conversations?
So with conversational intelligence, it's a human-centric methodology. And in a world where we're rapidly increasing our social network connections. The need for understanding conversational intelligence, or CIQ for short, we can call it, it's upon us. So
Hmm.
here at the Creating We Institute, our goal is to catalyze these changes in thought leadership. And we specialize in shaping cultures through neuroscience research and conversational intelligence. So there's really two components to that. The first component is understanding how CIQ can help us gain a mastery of our nervous systems through conversations. So what we found through our 30 some years of organizational culture research and the 50 some years of research in our scientific advisory board are that conversations affect us both at a cognitive level, but also at a biochemical and neural level. And so it really influences our ability to connect, navigate, and grow with people.
And do you find that social media has made our ability to have quality conversations worse?
That's an interesting question. I would say that it's a double-edged sword because if you think about what social media does is it allows us to connect with people,
Hmm.
but you're removing them from the natural environment. And what dictates our function in a face-to-face environment is surprisingly a little bit different than when we're over the phone, texting, or even doing something like we are now, Skyping. It involves more mentalizing. And since you're removing the viscera, you're removing the bodies from the interaction, it completely changes everything.
Yeah.
To your point, though, yes, sometimes social media can distort things because of its design. It can be designed as an echo chamber. And so sometimes people get stuck in their own viewpoints and they don't really get to open up as much. But at the same time, it's really nice if you can say hi to your friend who lives far away, and that can make you feel good too.
Yeah, it's always a question that comes up in conversations in our field because we deal with social media a lot in our field, but we also work very independently on computers much of the time, our community here and what we do. So it's interesting to think about how that disconnect from the human level where nonverbals are so important when it comes to being face to face, how that's affected our ability to effectively communicate,
Hmm.
right? So not just communicate, but to effectively get our message across. Just I was thinking about this podcast just last night and having a conversation with my daughter through text, and she had assumed that I was really mad because we were talking about something that was just like going on in the house, and she had assumed that I was like really upset, and I wasn't. And when I saw that she was getting more and agitated, I said, "Hey, can we just like come out and stop talking through phone and just meet in person?" So she could see that I wasn't upset. I wanted her to see my face and see that I wasn't angry and that this wasn't, I was just asking some questions. And I find that sometimes that electronic media conversation lacks that ability to really to do that effectively for some, maybe more than others.
And you're picking up on a really important point, which is that when we're in person and we're having these conversations, not only are we processing words and finding our own meaning in words and trying to find meaning in someone else's, we're exchanging energy. And that is going on at below awareness level.
Mm,
And when we're engaging over the phone or texting, those cues aren't there. The eye contact generally isn't there. You can't feel what the person is saying. So oftentimes we're engaging in a mentalizing task, trying to fill in the dots. And like you said, sometimes an innocuous text message can appear to be heated, or it can appear to have an emotional valence to it when maybe you're just saying something at face value.
yeah.
And that seems to be directly relevant to your job and your work. And I would like to ask you to please tell me a little bit more about what it is that you do.
Sure. So in our field, it's named penetration testing, right? So what we get to do, companies ask us to try to infiltrate their computer and or people network. So to simulate what a hacker or nation state or malicious actor would do. So in essence, it's kind of like, think of it, going to a doctor for a physical or some pre-tests. You say, "Hey, I'm not really sure if if I have cancer. I'm not really sure if I have a problem internally." So the doctor runs a whole bunch of blood tests, put heart monitor on you, run some scans, and then they come back and say, "Oh, you're great," or "Oh, we found this little anomaly. We need to dig deeper." And that's what we do for companies. So they say, hey, can you test us and tell us if there's any health problems? So we do tests that don't damage people. Our goal is to help. And we come back to the company and say, hey, when we ran this test, we found a few anomalies here. You got some problem, or worse, we found some cancer here. You got some really big problems, and we need to help fix that before an actual hacker or activist group or somebody gains access to this.
And this is all through social engineering?
It is. So our company in particular, not just our whole field, but our company in particular, we focus solely on the human aspect of it. So we do things like phishing and phone phishing and impersonation attacks, which we act like a fellow employee or a boss or something. And our job is to try to get someone in the company to do something they shouldn't do. And not to get them in trouble or get them fired, but to figure out where the company can improve their training and policies to help protect for when a real attack occurs.
Like, for example, you could pose as an IT person and try and get someone to give you their credentials or something like that.
Exactly. So, and that's actually one that we use often, where we try to get someone to give us information that they shouldn't give to an unverified user, and then we figure out how we did it, and then we tell the company, hey, this is what worked. So now we need to work on training to help your people not fall victim to these again.
I think that's a very fascinating and very relevant topic to conversational intelligence as well. As someone who doesn't work in an extremely large company, I don't know how common something like this is. Do you maybe have some statistics you could share about a company that has lost product or even money to a phishing scam or social engineering?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, so the Verizon puts out a report every year called the DBIR. And this past year, they said something in the 90%, 92%, I think it was, of all breaches. So when you see a report on the news of a company that got breached and their data was leaked or hacked, 92% of those breaches involve phishing as one of the main vectors. So an email came in and someone interacted with that, either gave over credentials or money or passwords or something to that effect. Phishing is the next largest vector, which is phone. And we're seeing that from corporate all the way down to like your grandma. Right? I mean, one of the biggest scams right now is happening against grandparents, where they're calling. Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, it really is. And they're calling older folks and they're saying your Social Security benefits are being disabled because you have a fine or a fee. And they're asking them to pay this fine and also collecting tons of data from them.
You're not going to believe this. It actually happened to my grandfather.
No.
Someone called my grandfather posing as me, saying that they were in jail and they needed him to send bail money.
That is
And
yes.
he was close to doing it, you know?
You know what we tell people, that attack has been going on now for about 2 years, maybe more, but it's really heavy in the news for about 2 years, and we're finding that a lot of older folks are falling for this. And what we're telling people is, look, this is happening. Come up with a code word, something that you don't say often, and you tell grandma and grandpa, listen, if someone calls and says they're me, ask for the code word. And if they don't know the code word, you hang up that phone. You don't give them anything.
That's a really good idea.
And that's what we've been telling people, because you can't expect grandma and grandpa, depending on their age, to think through all the ways to stay secure and stay safe from these attackers. So we try to make it as simple as possible. And in essence, what you just described is exactly what we do for a living. So it's constant conversation with folks and then trying to look for ways that aren't ridiculous to help people stay secure. Because saying like, don't be a human, right? You can't control the flow of oxytocin. You can't control your amygdala getting hijacked. You can't control these things. So we don't try to come up with solutions that involve that, but solutions that make it really hard for the attacker to achieve their goal.
Well, that's good work. I'm really happy that we have someone like you on the other end of it.
Well, thank
Because you
you.
usually check out the news and you don't hear anything on the positive side of it. It's usually just how clever the attacker was and how it took them so long to figure out that this wasn't legitimate or anything.
That's what sells, right, on media. So, and for us, that's actually okay being in the back end. The hard part with our industry is we say constantly it's a reactive, not proactive. But if I knew next month what the attackers were going to do, I'd be a billionaire. But since we don't know, what our industry ends up having to do is say, okay, look, they just performed this attack. Now let's figure out the fix and institute it.
And
Right?
publicize it. Yeah.
I would have never guessed in a million years that attackers would be calling your grandpa asking for money because you're in prison. But now that it's happened, we come up with solutions to help you fix it. The reason that it makes the news more is because the attacks are like the wow factor. You hear the news story, you're like, whoa, that is unbelievable. I can't believe that happened.
They're incredibly creative.
They are. They
And
are
that's what makes these
unbelievable.
stories so believable, is that they really do kind of hit home for people. And there's a level of rapport, there's a level of trust that has evolved with these scams. You notice when this stuff first came out, it was kind of crude and it was almost obvious. But now, as it becomes more discreet, as it appeals more to the emotional side, it's going to just get harder and harder to differentiate these things. And especially for someone like a grandparent who's just trying to look after their family, your first reaction isn't going to be, oh, is this legitimate? Your first reaction is going to probably be emotional and think, oh, I want to help this person.
So how does all that play into some of the areas of research that you did on these three, what do you call the three levels of conversation?
Totally. So, before we get into that, I just have to thank Judith and Richard Glazer, who are two of the most delightful, intelligent, and influential people that I've had the pleasure of knowing. A husband and wife of 50 some years, they co
Whoa.
founded our company, the Creating We Institute, and the methodology of conversational intelligence. Rich is an amusing, big hearted, handsome fellow who loves to talk about his family and friends. He's the kind of guy you'd like to say that you already knew before you met him. He's a real stand up guy. He has a PhD in biochemistry, and he's worked for many years in that field. He's the one who really taught me about how conversations go deeper. And he's taught me a lot about the physiology and how it influences our day to day interactions and our ability to connect, navigate, and grow with each other. That is what Judith Glazer defined as conversational intelligence, our human ability to connect, navigate, and grow. So each one of us holds this ability. However, we can also learn it through mastering conversational skills that actually do allow us to have some mediation over our nervous systems. So, and in turn, our conversations. So prior to this conversation, you might have said, well, I can't help it when I have an amygdala hijack, or I can't help it when I feel safe. That is in part true. We do have these primitive conditioned responses that can supersede anything. They're quicker than thought. However, cognition does enable us to reflect on things and build on habits. You can break a habit, you can change a habit, or you can start a new one. Unfortunately, we lost Judith last November to a 3-year battle with metastatic pancreatic cancer. So everything we do today is an embodiment of her work, and CIQ is her legacy and her brainchild.
That's with 50 years of marriage. It seems like they probably did good at mastering the conversation piece of that, right? Which makes it that's
Absolutely.
kind of like the they're definitely practicing what they're preaching. But that is sad to hear that she has passed from cancer. But I'm so glad what she left us was this legacy of things that we can learn from.
Absolutely. I mean, she was a rock star. If you want the true experience, you just got to go check out one of her interviews and get a feel for her energy yourself. They're available on our website. We had 4 interviews with renowned neuroscientists, and we called it the We IQ TV project. They're like 45-minute interviews with neuroscientists from various fields, from neuroendocrinology to medicine to more creative stuff. And you can really get a feel for Judith and the kind of company that she built, and she built them on conversations. And that's really where the magic happens, is that CIQ goes beyond money. Typically, when we're doing a proposal and someone wants to work with us, the first thing they'll ask is, where's my ROI? I want to see the green arrow going north. And we can produce that, and we can give them something to say that this company turned itself around and had a brilliant story. But when you start to see the changes that people make in themselves and between each other, it really breaks down these reality gaps. And it starts to make you appreciate the common ground that you have with others. And I think that's really where the magic of this stuff lies, is that you can take it home with you and you can understand, one, how your brain and body work and interact with the world to produce your experiences. And then two, how you can start to take control of your own experiences.
So, how does that fit into these levels? Like, how did you come up with conversation being broken down into three different levels or three different types?
Totally. So the conversational intelligence matrix is Judith's creation, actually. She came up with the idea just by analyzing conversations. If you really look at how people and parties interact and engage, there's always a level of belief of where you think you are in a conversation, for example.
Mm.
So you might think, "Oh, I'm really connecting with this person and we're doing really well." When in actuality, maybe that's not the case. Maybe that person feels like you are all talk and no listen. So,
I've
so
had that experience.
exactly. So basically, what we set out to do is figure out a way to analyze conversations. And the three levels are basically what we came up with. So, level one, transactional conversations confirm what we know and provide a platform for giving and receiving information. So, these types of conversations define space, they allow people to listen to confirm and protect their beliefs. So, for example, like you just kind of said, imagine you're in a conversation where you realize that every so often you're stopping to process words and translate the meaning of those words into your own interpretations. This is listening to confirm,
Mm.
and it's a low level of listening. And unfortunately, it's kind of hard to get out of. A really important rule of level one conversations is that meaning is embedded in the listener. Classically, people might think it's in the speaker, but it's how the person interprets what is being said that dictates the meaning of the message. So every so once in a while, we have to pause and say, okay, he said or she said this, but in my head, I have this meaning of it. In that case, we're really just transacting information.
Let's take a quick break from the show to talk about what's going on in the world of social engineer. And there is just a ton. I mean, literally a ton. Okay, so first and foremost, if you're listening to this podcast, it is literally next week that the first human hacking conference is kicking off in Orlando. And if you have not signed up and you want to go, you probably have 2 more days before we close the doors. So get into this. This is just an unbelievable show. There's no other place on the planet where you're going to get Joe Navarro, Robin Dreek, Dov Barron, Stephanie Paul, R. Paul Wilson, Ian Rowland, Brittany Caldwell, and Amanda Berlin all in one location with some of the other top leading social engineers in the world. Like anyone who's in social engineering, this is where you need to be. So if you have an interest in it at all from a scientific level, you're just an enthusiast or you do it for work, you need to get over to sevillage.org and get signed up and come on down. Now, a couple other things I want to talk about. March 16th, our advanced practical social engineering class right down here in Orlando, Florida. Get signed up for that. We're probably about half full, maybe in that class already. And then April is our master's course, so you get an invite to that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, sorry, come to APSE and you'll know. And then our APSE class in Bristol, UK, June 1 through 5. That one is about 30% full from my understanding. So we have a little more time for that, but you want to confirm and get your seat before the prices go up there. We do plan, of course, being out at DEF CON. Hopefully by now there's already a launch on the website. So check out social-engineer.org for all your information on SE Village at DEF CON. And maybe there's some announcements too about new training coming up that I just don't have right yet. Now keep checking the sites. And of course, if you want to support us with our nonprofit, where we are using white hat hackers from our wonderful community here to help law enforcement uncover child predators and turn them over for justice, then you can check out innocentlivesfoundation.org. Thanks for your support. Let's get back to the show. That's a fascinating little tidbit right there. Oftentimes we talk about like the value of something should always be judged by the receiver, not the sender.
Precisely.
And you're saying that to be the case for conversation is that I may have my best intentions. I may be thinking I'm going to say this sentence and it's going to change someone's life, but I need, in essence, if I'm hearing you right, and please tell me, I need to rethink that about how will that sentence be received by the audience, whether that's one person or 1,000 people that I'm talking to.
Exactly. That's a great place to start. To give you a little bit of a background as to maybe how this was discovered is Judith originally worked in a corporate setting with Fortune 500 companies. And how we came to this matrix was actually kind of through the back end, through seeing behaviors in real life. So one of the major blind spots in level 1, and particularly with leaders, is what we call tell, sell, yell syndrome. And I think everyone kind of has an idea of what that is, but
Yeah, I think I've done it.
totally. So, basically, not everyone is going to be a tell, sell, yell person. But to kind of make that point mend with what we were talking about, if you're always trying to have conversations where you're leading the discussion, where you're focusing on convincing others that you're right and you have a fixed opinion, you're failing to connect with them because you're not really understanding how they're interpreting things. So you can go into a room and say, I need to get this done, and I need us to meet this engagement, and I need it done this way. And you think, I'm a great leader. I just laid out a path to success, and now everyone can follow me. If you don't realize that that is a highly conflicting thing for your team, and they are triggered emotionally by your tone, and they feel closed off, and there's no connection through sharing, then the meaning of your words could be entirely different to someone who's being triggered emotionally. And so that is really where we start. It's this idea that you might think you're in a dialogue, but you could really be in a monologue, you know?
Wow, yes, very true. That is quite a fascinating thought. Yeah. So, how do you do that? How do you do that first step? How do you step back and think about the receiver when, really we're usually stuck in our own thoughts?
That's a really good question. That's the $1,000,000 question. I think that is the hardest part of all of it. It's the initial discovery process for people to get them out of their old habit patterns, because it's really easy to just fall into what, in many cases, it's not as black and white as, oh, this is good or this is bad. A lot of the people we work with are extremely successful, and they've gotten to where they've gotten doing what they do, so to speak. It really takes one, the individual to want to do it. You can't force someone to do these things, and we definitely aren't in the realm of technology where we can manipulate neural circuitry and sort of condition people into these things just yet. So the individual really has to want to do this first and foremost.
Mm.
So when they want to do it, they can begin discovering, what we call the neuroscience of conversations. And you can start in a few different places. In this case, for what you're saying, what might be easiest is to identify a blind spot. And we call this one reality gaps. It's this idea that people think that everyone sees the world the way they see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that couldn't be farther from the truth, And so a huge part of CIQ is getting people to realize that in order to connect with others, they have to lower their guards and sort of kind of give up their position in conversations at times in order to receive the other person, to understand what they're doing. And once you have that realization, once you actually start to understand that people aren't seeing it the way that you are, it's going to change the way that you interact with people. And I think from there is really where the conversations start to take flight and go into what we call level 2 positional conversations. This is where partners begin to start exploring each other's positions. They listen to accept or reject ideas. And rather than giving and taking, we're really sharing a space now in level 2. And by understanding, like I said, that we have these reality gaps, you can begin to work with others and ask more questions and start a dialogue of trust.
Yeah, and that seems hard to do. Like that first part that you said, like getting into the process of thinking about someone else's feelings during the conversation seems like it would take a very large level of empathy in order to do that.
Hmm.
And do you find that to be something that can be taught or is common, or is there a tip or trick that you can give someone to even try that?
Yeah, so I think an important distinction to make is the differences between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. So,
Mm.
sympathy is setting an intention to care for someone. It's saying that I want to know how you feel. Empathy is a more visceral process that involves actually feeling what the other person does. And there's actually some incredible neuroscience behind what happens when we're in a truly empathetic state. And then compassion supersedes all. Compassion is the ability to want to help someone, to feel what they're feeling, and then to actually be able to help them.
Hmm.
So, what we can do to bridge these reality gaps is to start our conversations with sympathy. And basically, that's saying that I care about how you feel. And that really lowers guards and it opens the doors for trust to come in. Because if someone just wants to talk to you and they assume that they know how you feel and maybe you think they don't, that can trigger you and that can lead to a feel bad conversation. But if someone starts a conversation saying that, look, I care about how you feel, I want to know more about the feelings that you have so that maybe we can empathize and physically share them. And those are the deep connections that open the door to compassion, allowing us to link our sympathetic intentions to our impact.
Uh huh. Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so I didn't mean to derail and stop at the level two. So now we have this level two side, which is positional conversations. How does that differ from the level one?
It can differ in a few ways. If you want to talk about listening styles, basically the differences are in level one, you're almost stuck in your own head. And it's more of a basic serve and return process. That's on the negative aspect. By the way, there's good and bad sides to every style here. It's not to say that level one conversations are have no place. They have every place. In fact, most of the conversations we have every day are level one conversations, just basic serve and return. But as you get into level two, you're starting to pull out the meaning of what the other person is saying. You're no longer just exchanging information.
Does moving from a level one to level two conversation require more rapport or more like a closer relationship, or is it just the style changes and how we interact?
Well, I think that unfortunately the data is not that far ahead yet. I would say that it's definitely a really compelling case to say that trust is a critical component of physically synchronizing with someone,
Hmm.
with being able to connect deeply with them. What I will say is that when you start to enter level two, you start to inspire with the other person. And that's what allows these empathetic feelings to begin to be exchanged. So if you're a very shy person, then maybe absolutely, maybe you can't connect with a complete stranger. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are really social bugs just like my mom who can go to a bar and strike up a conversation with someone and before you know it they're full on into level 3. So individual differences definitely play a huge factor in that.
Okay, so yeah, it seems like even though maybe the research doesn't support it yet, it seems like that would be logical that we would see a higher level of that sympathy, empathy, compassion process that would transform you from the level one to level two because that connection has to be deeper. It seems like.
Absolutely. And when I say that the research isn't there yet, that just goes to show where we're at in the world right now in these processes and just how lucky we are to have had Judith create all of this stuff as far out as she did. And it seems like the more and more we dig, it's just the more and more we find out that what she's saying is the truth. We always find interesting little changes in it, like for example, that texting is a little bit different than in person conversations. There's always an interesting pivot point. But in terms of just figuring out how these things relate to the physical reactions that we're having. It is really fascinating. And we want to say that trust is the foundation of these healthy relationships, and we're getting there, and we're beginning to understand what that means at a neuroscientific level. So from the top down, it is true. You do need trust to emerge into these different levels. But as far as what trust is at a physical level, we're just now beginning to understand that.
So then, when we take that from the level 2 to level 3, now what are the changes to that next level?
Okay. So, level 3 transformational conversations are all about exchanging energy. And this is kind of what I was talking about. And it really kicks the doors down for deeply feeling what others are. So, level 3 conversations are co creative in nature and very transformative. So, instead of accepting or rejecting ideas, you're beginning to connect and build this trusting relationship, and you're sharing and discovering together. So it opens up the doors to broader insights that neither partner could have had prior. Basically, you start asking questions that you don't have the answers to, and you create a platform to participate with others in.
Hmm. So there's no like leader in that conversation. That conversation is like two equals, let's say, getting together and just trying to figure something out, or just get to a point in like you're just literally, it can be anything from, in my mind I had two different scenarios. I had like a philosophical group that talks about problems in the world, and then I had a very simplistic example of like two people dating, and there's no leader in that. You're just trying to get to a point. Are we going to move to the next step here? Are we going to figure out, from a philosophical point, the problems and how to fix them, so on and so forth? Am I understanding that right?
Precisely. So I think that what you touched on is the idea that it creates a sense of shared success, and it empowers everyone involved to fully participate. And basically, that's what you said. There's no true leader in it. It's open to everyone. And when we're engaging with others, it's provocative and it stimulates questions rather than trying to close people off into territorial behaviors.
Right. Okay.
However, one pitfall of this is that if the interaction begins to dissipate, we can fall back into a groupthink in this scenario.
No. Okay. So now, what are the indicators? Like before, you talked about there being some physiological indicators. Are there changes to us, both physiologically or psychologically, when we get to this level of conversation?
To level 3?
Yes.
Yes. When you're in a level 3 conversation, you're fully connecting with the other person. Now, in terms of what is going on inside your body, what you can notice is that you've completely quelled your instincts of danger or threat at this point. You've down regulated your stress response. People in level 1 conversations could be seeing
Hmm.
red. If we're viewing this through an emotional lens, of course there could be a sort of impartial level to each one of these scenarios where you're more or less stable emotionally. But in a level 3 conversation, you're going to see the suppression of those stress responses, and you're going to see your social engagement systems come online. And so you're going to have rich tone in your voice. You're going to see a lot of eye contact, and you're just generally going to probably feel more relaxed as your sympathetic nervous system begins to downregulate its activity. And you would like to see the increase in oxytocin. You would like to see that upregulated, more sensitivity to emotional stimulus, more bonding, and generally overall a feeling of well-being. These are feel-good conversations that you're having.
So you could probably equate this to somebody like your best friend or your mate or your children, in a really happy, open conversation. That this is where you would generally see these types of level threes.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, it sounds like, I shouldn't use the word obviously. I was told by another podcast guest that's a bad word. But it seems like that level 3 being that awesome, like you said, oxytocin is there. We feel this wonderful equality. That's really the goal, is to have our conversations reside there, or is that just unrealistic to say that we're always going to have these level 3 type of conversations?
Okay, so that's interesting that you say that. So, like I said, there's healthy and unhealthy aspects of each part. So, I'll go through each one and I'll give you one. In level one, in a healthy mindset, we're exchanging information and we're validating what we know. So, when you and I first connect, we exchanged a little bit of information. We talked about some common ground in fishing, and we validated something that we knew. And that gave us the ability to go into a level two conversation where we began to explore each other's points of views, seek a win-win solution, which eventually brought it all the way forward to level three, where maybe we connected. And that's the good side. There's a progression to this. On the other side of it, maybe if we're stuck in a level one conversation where one person is just telling and yelling too much and they're not asking or listening.
Mm.
In level two conversations, this is a really important thing. It's called addicted to being right. Now,
That sounds like 90% of the conversations in the world today.
yes, this is a little bit different than the tell yell because there is a little more creativity in this. Tell yell sell is kind of brute and territorial. But when we're addicted to being right, we can tend to lead our questions and tend to try and lead the conversation into a certain alleyway or a
Hmm.
certain desired outcome rather than truly trying to explore the other person and break down that reality gap.
Oh, that's fascinating. So now you're not just commanding, you're kind of almost manipulating the conversation to your end goal.
Exactly. So to your point, like when we talked about someone in an IT group who is pretending to be an IT person to get information from someone in a company, they're using this level two position to extract information from this person. So
Yeah.
there's an intermittence of level two and level one in there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
For level three conversations, like you said, ideally we would like to be here all the time because it feels good, but you have a tendency to be all talk and no action at times. So think about it. If
Oh.
you have a close talk with a friend and you're connecting emotionally and you're trying to get to the bottom of something and it feels good, but all of a sudden it's 2 hours later and you're still talking about it, it can begin to get exhaustive, you know?
Yes. And you really that's actually wow, I didn't think of that. Such a valid, fascinating point. Even though on the first level, when you told me and you described it, my brain went automatically to, wow, that's where every conversation should be. But you're 100% right. It would be terrible to get on the phone with a client and 2 hours later, everyone's got like oxytocin pouring from their ears, but nothing got done. We're all really
Absolutely.
happy, but we've accomplished zero.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere my boss, Rich, is going to be laughing at that one.
Yeah, because I'm telling you, because I could see that clearly and be like, yeah. Now that you said it, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. That would not be the best form of conversation for every case.
Yeah, and so that's really a common misunderstanding with this stuff. It's not it is a benchmark in an aspirational sense, but the art of the conversation is figuring out how to navigate these levels and figuring out when to access the right dimension.
Well, Nicholas, I think you did it. I think you actually got me to like all three levels. And if I ask you one more question, I feel like we will be going for hours, and then we'll both be looking at our watches, wondering what we're doing. Because this is fascinating to me. I mean, especially when it's new, but not because it's new. The area of research that you just told me is all new, but I'm applying it to all these past conversations and going, oh, I definitely did that, or I've seen myself do that, or oh, no, that's embarrassing. I've done that. I'm having all of those emotional responses to this. So thank you for that.
Of course, it's intrinsic to our nature. We're social beings.
That is for sure. That is for 100% for sure. And a lot of so our listeners, we have two things I want to ask you in conclusion. They're going to want to know more about your research, the company you work for, maybe following you and what you're doing next. Is there social media or a website you want to promote that can help people to find out more about you?
Of course, thank you. We have a Twitter. The handle is creating we, and our website is www.creatingwe.com. That's we as in us.
Excellent. And what I'll do is I'll put those both in the show notes. So anyone who's listening, don't have to worry about while you're driving writing it down. They'll be in the show notes, and you can check those both out. Now, final question. our listeners are also avid readers. And for the last decade or so, we've been collecting a list of books that have been recommended by every podcast guest we've ever had on. And it doesn't even have to be about this topic. It can just be a fascinating book that you read or something that you like, or a book that you read 100 times that you think this is really useful. Is there a book or two that you can recommend?
Of course. That's very cool, by the way, that you're compiling that list. I would love to see it.
Thank you.
So, first and foremost, if anyone wants to read more specifically about conversational intelligence, there's the book Conversational Intelligence available on Amazon, easy to find.
And who wrote that? Is that you?
That's by Judith Glazer.
Judith. Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Excellent.
It's one of her She posted a trilogy, and that's the last in the trilogy. It's a good read. If you want a page-turning novel, I would recommend The Fear Index by British author Robert Harris. I found this book in a train station on my way to Yosemite, and I didn't put it down the whole bus ride in. It's about a hedge fund manager who creates this artificial intelligence that begins to unseed his well-being. It's very interesting.
That is awesome. And by the way, I don't know, you couldn't have possibly planned that, but that's a great book for this industry. we're always worried about like AI being the next attack vector. So this is probably just going to feed into everyone's tinfoil hat delusions that we already have.
Absolutely.
So this is great. And I love it when guests come on and give us not just like the work-based books, but something fun.
Absolutely.
We've had that happen a few times, and it's always fascinating. I can't thank you enough. This was awesome conversation, and I learned a lot personally. I'm sure everyone listening will have learned a lot, and there seems like there's enough for us to have another conversation coming up in the near future about more of your research. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was probably a year ago I started listening to podcasts, and I joked to my girlfriend, like, it'd be so fun to be on one. And so here I am now. I'm really grateful that you had me on.
Not a problem. There's a bucket list item. There you are.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nick.
All right. Thank you, Chris. I'd love to be back.
Another phenomenal show. Okay, honestly, I wasn't even making that up. Nick and I can talk probably for hours. It was great. I mean, truly great. I learned a lot, and I can't wait. I'm actually going to say we have to have him on again. If you agree, let me know. Send me an email, shoot me a comment through the podcast. Just do something. Let me know if we should have him on again. Send in your questions so I can make it more targeted next time. But I think that was really, really worth the effort and time for what we can learn from him there. Any other comments, you can come over to social-engineer.org or social-engineer.com. You can follow me personally on Human Hacker. We have Innocent.org for the Innocent Lives Foundation and SOC Engineer Inc. for our corporate Twitters. Anything to do with SE Village, check out Twitter at SE Village. That is literally the Twitter account. Oh boy, there's just so many more things I can say, but enjoy the beautiful sounds of Clutch on the outro as you let this podcast just melt into your mind, creating a whole new level of conversation for yourself. I know that was very, very zen, and I'm sorry for that at the end. But until next month, hopefully I will see some of you at SE Village here in Orlando, and for the rest of you, chat next month. See you.